So, have you ever actually wondered what your mind is when it's not constantly busy trying to survive? In this explainer, we're diving into a totally fascinating new framework by researcher John Cantillo. It literally rethinks the entire architecture of our minds. When we talk about extraordinary conscious experiences, like near-death experiences or deep meditative states, we almost always focus on the wild content, right? The tunnels, the bright lights, the life reviews. But Cantillo argues that looking at the content is, well, it's actually looking in the completely wrong direction. If we really want to understand consciousness, we can't just look at what changes. We've got to look at the underlying organization, the strict regimes that govern how we experience reality itself.
And that brings us to the profound question anchoring this whole journey. What actually happens to consciousness when our survival instincts are just completely turned off? Think about it. If we strip away the biological imperatives driving us, that absolute relentless need to stay alive, find food, and interact with the physical world, what exactly is left of our awareness?
To answer that, we're going to map out consciousness on a spectrum across 4 distinct sections. We've got the waking survival engine, the transitional dream state, the shock of profound perturbation, and finally, the pure observer mode. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Waking Survival Engine. We tend to think of ordinary waking life as just, reality, the normal, unedited way things are. But according to this framework, waking life isn't just some default setting. It's actually heavily constrained by continuous sensory input and biological needs that are entirely designed to keep us alive. You've got ordinary body-centered localization, basically anchoring you in physical space. And because this waking state is an adaptive specialization for survival, it is incredibly stable. Our brains are practically locked into this mode, just relentlessly checking for threats and opportunities. This extreme stability is exactly why entering and maintaining transitional regimes, like, say, hitting a deep meditative state, is inherently so tough. Your mind is literally fighting to stay anchored in survival mode.
So, waking consciousness functions as what Cantillo calls an actor organization. This means our minds are hyper-stabilized to interact with a physical environment. A massive part of this is salience prioritization. Just think about your own experience for a second. You can be sitting in a noisy, crowded cafe, but if someone drops a glass, bam, you instantly zero in on that loud crash over the background hum. Your brain highlights exactly what is biologically important for survival and ignores the rest. We're built to act, to manipulate our surroundings, and to be detected by others. This organizational regime forces us to be active participants simply because our lives literally depend on it.
Think of these biological constraints kind of like the painted lines in a parking lot. It's such a brilliant way to picture this. The paint doesn't physically force your car to move into a spot, right? But it radically organizes how you drive. Our waking consciousness doesn't use some magical extra energy to make us behave a certain way. Instead, the constraints of our biological body and our sensory organs shape our possibilities. They keep us perfectly aligned in this actor regime so we don't crash into the metaphorical cars around us.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Transitional Dream State.
So what happens when we naturally start relaxing those parking lot lines during sleep? Well, sleep inherently relaxes our sensory and survival-related constraints, and that allows this highly unique dream regime to emerge. It's kind of a messy middle ground where passive observer traits are forced to coexist with lingering actor traits. As those sensory constraints drop off, you start experiencing observer traits, like altered time, where hours can feel like minutes, and a broadened accessibility to memories and imagery. Yet your brain is still clinging to being an actor, giving you partial body awareness and that distinct feeling that you're still doing things inside the dream.
Have you ever tried to run in a dream, but your legs feel like they're moving through thick molasses? Or you try to scream and absolutely nothing comes out? That right there is your physical agency turned off, even while your mind remains partially an actor. In dreams, a chemical process called neuromodulation literally paralyzes your body. It prevents actual interaction with the real physical environment while your mind still tries to act. This creates what Cantillo calls a metastable condition. It's a shaky, fluctuating state caught exactly halfway between observing and acting.
Looking at how stability, agency, and embodiment map across these regimes, you can see waking life is highly stable with high environmental agency. But the transitional state is metastable, meaning it's shaky. It has fluctuating agency and partial embodiment. This inherent instability is exactly why lucid dreams or deep meditative states are so notoriously hard to hold on to. You usually either snap awake or fall completely into deep, unconscious sleep. But look at that bottom row. The fundamental regime is completely devoid of agency and embodiment, yet it is highly stable. So how exactly do we get there?
Let's look at Section 3, the shock of profound perturbation.
Let's explore what happens when the human system is profoundly shocked by something like a near-death experience or severe clinical trauma. This isn't the gradual, fluctuating relaxation of sleep or meditation. When extreme events hit, they release all organizational constraints simultaneously. Cantelo calls this a transition discontinuity. Our waking survival engine is so tightly wound and so stabilized by sensory input that it takes a massive perturbation to knock us completely out of it. And when it does happen, it allows us to bypass that messy, fluctuating transitional state entirely.
Unlike the gradual slide into sleep, exiting and re-entering the waking state through profound perturbation is an abrupt, sudden shock to the system. It's really a phase-like transition, honestly much like liquid water instantly snapping into solid ice. People don't slowly fade into these profound states. As the quote notes, they report an abrupt separation from ordinary bodily awareness and upon revival, violently slamming right back into it.
And that brings us to Section 4, the pure observer mode.
Now we reach our final destination. We want to see what exactly is left when all survival constraints are completely shattered. Cantelo refers to this as the fundamental mode of consciousness. But instead of getting caught up in what people claim to see in these extraordinary states, we're shifting focus to what are called negative invariants. Why does this matter? Well, because by stripping away the subjective noise of individual claims, we find hard, universal data in what consistently vanishes. Across countless profound reports, regardless of the person's culture or their personal beliefs, certain traits universally disappear the moment the survival engine shuts down.
First up, the feeling of having a localized physical body completely vanishes. It leaves behind this unconstrained experiential presence. Now, you still possess a clear sense of identity, that fundamental feeling of, I am still me, along with the seamless continuity of experience. However, the heavy, localized constraint of being anchored inside physical limbs, entirely gone. Experiencers often describe this not as a loss, but actually as a profound lightness. They just simply are, existing as a point of awareness without the dragging weight or boundaries of a physical form.
Next, the ability to move physical objects or influence the physical environment is entirely gone. This is known as environmental non-agency. Think about our waking brains for a second. We have this desperate, constant desire to manipulate our environment, right? To fix things, move things, interact. The total absence of this desire in the fundamental mode is incredibly jarring, but also fascinating. Despite feeling intensely aware and present, the experiencer can no longer interact with the not-self environment. And crucially, they don't even feel the urge to. The actor organization is completely shut down. You are no longer participating, you are just witnessing.
And finally, others in the environment do not notice you. You become a pure, undetectable observer. There's no reciprocal accessibility. You can perceive the physical world, but the physical world absolutely cannot perceive you. It's genuinely awe-inspiring when you really think about it. Without the relentless demands of biological adaptation and physical survival, consciousness doesn't just disappear or blank out. Instead, it seemingly settles into a deeply stable, perfectly silent witness.
To be clear here, this framework makes absolutely no claims about dualism or life after death. It's simply mapping out how consciousness phenomenologically organizes itself based on biological constraints. But when we look at this data objectively, we really have to ask the ultimate question. If shedding our biological constraints reveals our consciousness as a pure, continuous observer, are we human beings who are slowly learning to observe? Or are we pure observers, temporarily strapped into a highly constrained human survival engine? Just something to think about the next time you wake up.